Yan, medyo pag-usapan naman natin si Lenny. Yan. I think dun sa ibang FPL Live natin, medyo, we spend a lot of time focusing dun sa campaign ni Marcos, and then of course, campaign ni Isko, among others. I think today, I thought maybe talk a little bit more about the Lenny campaign and where it's heading. Of course, kung gusto niyo makita yung analysis ko, I've written extensively on Lenny's campaign, among others, dun sa aking mga columns, among others. But pag-usapan natin yan. And in fact, one thing I want to talk about dun sa latter part of Meta Alive natin today is the possibility na, well, I mean, we keep on talking about Marcos versus Lenny. The Isco camp also want to talk about potentially this goes down to Isco versus Marcos. But I think one scenario that we're not talking about as much, and hindi naman mukhang imposible, especially in light of all of these kumbaga, bundles of disqualification cases being filed against Marcos. One scenario we can talk about is the possibility that this could go down between Isco and Lenny. So I think that's another showdown that is not being talked as much about. At interesting yan because not long ago, of course, ang pinag-usapan natin is yung the fact that just a few months ago Isko was being considered as the opposition unity candidate, and now of course he's positioning himself potentially as the administration candidate. No, for me, another potential plot twist is if, depending dun sa mangyayari sa disqualification cases, what if wala na si Marcos dito sa race na yan few months down the road? Again, I'm not saying that's probable, but that's a possibility we have to take into consideration. And then, it could potentially become an Isco versus Lenny fight. But before we go there, no, unang-una pag-usapan natin itong campaign ni Lenny, no. What I want to say is this. Unang-una, when it comes to Lenny, mukhang this is not just an electoral campaign, no. Increasingly, mukhang nagiging movement siya. So, nakikita natin yung grassroots movement, yung mobilization on the ground, yung solidness at excitement ng mga supporters ni Lenny from the poorest and most poorest margins of the country to the wealthier neighborhood dito sa Manila. Nakikita natin na Lenny does inspire a significant, passionate support base. So, despite all of the yung mga attack sa kanya, Lenny Luga, all of that, mukhang inaangkin yung issue na yan, no? So we have this kind of a Luga wave, no, going across, whereby people across the country, are showing a lot of support for Leni Robredo, and sa ang basa ko talaga dito is talagang the best chance, if not the only chance, for Leni Robredo to really change the direction of country next year, kumpara dun sa nangyari over the past 5 years, is not to just run a good electoral campaign, or in that sense, Bam Aquino running a good electoral campaign, but Lenny actually overseeing a totally new, rejuvenated movement in the Philippines, a movement that emphasizes compassion, care, consideration, thoughtfulness, strategy, evidence-based public policy, no? So, movement talagang kailangan ng Lenny campaign, I think, if they wanna really pull off what initially looked like a very unlikely and hopeless campaign, but now that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, I won't be surprised baka number 3 siya or number 2 pa rin siya dun sa Pulse Asia na survey na lalabas this month. Again, of course, surveys don't say anything. They just provide us at best a snapshot. But what I'm saying is that what Lenny's doing here is she's really mobilizing a nationwide campaign, and yung level of passion and enthusiasm na nakikita natin sa kanyang supporters, cutting across all political and socioeconomic classes, no? Makikita natin from the poorest quarters of the country to the wealthiest quarter, she has this kind of appeal and charisma to a lot of people. No, again, of course, alam natin yung mga meta, pagtawanan naman si Lenny, etc. Sige, underestimate nyo lang, diba? I mean, she was very much underestimated back in 2016, and we saw what happened. And of course, you can argue that, well, back in 2016, there was the LP machinery, etc. Well, in 2022, there is also this factor that was not there in 2016, which is na-expose yung paucity of Dutertismo. No? Back then, maraming naniwala na pag si Tata yung presidente within 6 months, ganyan. Well, now, nakita natin anong katotohanan. No? So, and, of course, Lenny is not running in normal circumstances. She's running under very extraordinary circumstances, and that is, of course, the pandemic, the economic crisis, and of course, not to mention yung tens of thousands of alleged extrajudicial killings in the country, and also some, I would say, blunders in terms of our foreign policy. So she's running, as an opposition. This is not actually the worst time for her to run. No. So she may have had certain advantages in the past na wala siya ngayon. But remember in 2016 that Moody was already shifting against liberalism, right? Kaya nga nanalo si Duterte. Kaya nga razor thin margin yung talo ni Bongbong Marcos, no? That's why for a long time si Bongbong Marcos was the leading candidate, because it was already turning against liberalism. I'm not sure that's the case in 2022. I'm not saying that suddenly people will try to hug back, no, yung liberal politics and all. But now, there's resentment and anger and frustration with what has been happening over the past few years, or at least the past 2 years. No? So, yun din ang dapat titignan natin. At kung machinery lang usapan, di sana, kung machinery lang usapan, di sana si Mitrang nanalo nun, diba? Or si De Venecia, or si Villar, or si Binay, or si Mar, diba? Hindi naman yung issue. May machinery ba si Duterte nung una? I would say that probably until February, wala siyang machinery. I mean, only February nakita mo na ang taas nung ad spendings ni Duterte noong 2016. So, there you can see that actually, things can sway because define machinery. Because if it's money, donors, LGUs, trapos on the ground supporting you, well, they can shift, diba? Depending on the direction of the race. So, in that sense, LENI can benefit from an anti-incumbency mode. And this time, incumbency is not the liberalism that LENI represented in 2016, but the kind of authoritarian populism that President Duterte represents. No? So yun lang. So I think that's a factor that it's kept on. Parang kulang. Yan ang nakikita kong kulang sa mga analysis. Si LENI, wala na machinery yan. Katulad ng 2016, wala hopeless. But remember, that time, actually the mood was shifting against values that Leni Robredo was representing, no? Kaya nga nanalo si Duterte, kaya nga napakalakas ng performance ni BBM noong 2016. But this time, it's quite a different dynamic, no? So yun. So I think movement is something very important. But let me make a point kasi bago dito sa ating discussion, pinanood ko yung commercials. Sorry, may text na biglang na-distract ako kasi baka may mga deliveries ako ngayon going back to this, pinanood ko yung commercial ni Leni at saka commercial ni Bongbong Marcos. I mean, again, for a moment, just put aside everything we know about Marcoses or Leni, etc. On one hand, I think yung commercial ni Leni had very strong care factor. Kita mo talaga yung sincere leadership. Well, again, I'm just analyzing the commercial, no? Yung parang yung care factor nandyan, yung talagang pinag-isipan yung issue, yung kalayaan sa COVID-19 at pandemic. Nakikita mo naman, very systematic, very coherent, etc. My comment though, and I think other astute analysts like Manolo Quezon have mentioned this in their column on others, is parang the way I put it is this, medyo kulang sa cool factor yung kay Leni. Hindi ko alam yun dun sa Dragon Ball Z, yung mga ganun-ganun yan. I don't know sino gumawa na yun, may pakanan yan. I don't think you want to go down that road kasi yun nga yung strength nila BBM is cool factor. They really have a cool factor dun sa TikToks nila, dun sa vlogs nila. Di ba vlogger na nga si BBM, di ba? Di ba sa dulo ng vlog na si Sandro sabi, thanks guys for watching my dad's vlog. So makikita mo talaga na may vlogger cool element si the Marcos campaign. They have the cool factor. I mean, you can say whatever, but may cool factor talaga sila, no? So I think Leni has to a little bit give also a cool factor twist dun sa kanyang mga commercials at messaging. Because as much as na-appreciate ng tao ang isang sincere na leader, yung isang leader na really feels the pains of the people at hindi siya divorce sa reality at hindi siya bara-bara, people also want hope. Tingnan yung commercial ni Bongbong Marcos. Tapos parang blue na siya ngayon, no? Hindi na red or pink na parang umagang kay ganda ba yan? Parang, honestly, like parang if you just put aside some of the concerns you have with facts, with Marshall, etc., honestly, it gets a little bit emotional. I think the advertisement is very well done. And I think it really plays into this Filipino optimism that at the end of the day, everything will be all right. And to a certain degree, siguro nakuha rin natin yan sa mga Amerikano, yung kind of American optimism. I think yung medyo na-inculcate din natin. But of course, meron din tayo Filipino optimism. No? We are very resilient people, as they always say, yung cliche words na yan, no? So I think what LENI has to do is to make the campaign messaging have as much care factor and sincere leadership factor, but I think dapat i-upgrade yung cool factor and not yung mga Dragon Ball Z and all of that. Tapos dun sa Dragon Ball Z nga, parang mas ano pa yung yung eye bags ni ma'am kaysa sa akin eh. Di ba? Parang pangit-pangit na nga eye bags ko, pero napansin ko pa rin eh. Parang, di ba? Yung parang pagod si ma'am na enervated and all. So I think would be nicer to show him a fresh, di ba? Fresh na cool factor. And I think naman you can combine cool and care. I mean, honestly, some would say I'm cool, right? But many people who know me very well also know I care. I deeply, deeply care about issues in our country. I deeply, deeply care about so many things. No? So, I can just say from my own humble experience na pwede mo naman siguro i-combine yung cool factor at care factor. At yun yung kailangan, I think, yun yung combination na kailangan dun sa campaign messaging ni LENI na pag ako yung leader, hindi lang yung parang matapos ng trahedya at lalabas tayo dito, hindi lang na I'm a very caring leader and sincere and all of that, and hindi lang ako bola, populist tricks and theatrics. But, just to give also people, if I'm going to be your leader, I'm going to excite you, I'm going to inspire you. The sunlight, the sun rays are just, pilferating through the clouds and we are there. So essentially show the promised land, right? Show the promised land. Yung ganun dapat yung medyo, I think yung messaging cadence, no, at angling ng campaign ni LENI. Yun humble advice ko as an analyst, because to be honest, I don't know ano yung algorithm ni ano pangalan niya, ni Zuckerberg or yung Google, 'di ba? Pero parang parating nakikita ko commercial online, alam mo sino? Lacson at Isko. Hindi ko alam bakit. So alam ko na yung mga yung Education Plus, yung mga basta yung mga commercials ni Lacson, which are also very interesting. I would say yung una nga, hindi ko nga alam na political commercial pala. Okay, ayos to. Ano to? Parang NGO ba to? Ganun. Tapos sa dulo, biglaan doon si Lacson, Education Plus, ganun. So in fairness, magaling din yung mga commercials nila Lacson. Isko naman, nakita ko rin medyo yung mga commercials niya pag, sa web, sa online, ganun. Pero kanina chinek ko talaga, kinumpare ko yung commercials ni BBM at saka ni LENI, no? At doon talaga kitang-kita mo na si LENI ay, yung kay LENI is, talagang strong sa care factor, sincerity factor, pero the cool factor has to be there. Because cool factor is very important. Kasama yan sa charisma. Kasi, you see, when you're cool, diba? When you're cool, you make people comfortable. Parang, ako ang bahala sa inyo, diba? With me, we can go to the promised land. It's just there. Ako ang bahala sa inyo. Tiwala lang kayo sa akin. I think that factor is very important. And in fairness, doon kay BBM, kung tignan mo yung commercial niya, may pagka-ganun factor na parang steady hand ako. And then, of course, hindi naman siya kulang sa cool factor doon sa mga TikToks nila and vlogs nila and all. Pero doon sa commercial ni Bongbong Marcos, meron din yung avuncular sincerity, steady-handedness. So yun. So I think steady-handedness with cool factor and inspiration. So care and cool. I think yun ang medyo mahalaga. So I don't want to overemphasize this point. The other thing I want to talk about here is, there is, I won't say significant, but there's definitely a possibility, not probability, na the race could dramatically change, and this disqualification case, yung mga DQ cases against Marcos, na nung una mukhang improbable, mukhang questionable, mukhang political theatrics lang, parang they're gaining a little bit momentum, no? So whether these cases will drag on or whether they will really lead into some decisive result against BBM, we don't know, right? Debatable naman yung merits of the legal issue, but more important than the legal issue is the political aspect, right? How will Duterte's appointing commission elections deal with this issue? Will they ensure that they deal with this in the most independent way? And of course, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Will Tatay Digong try to lean in one direction or the other on them? Let's see. So I think those are still the unknown factors. But if titingnan mo yung mga legal cases, the petitions are coming from different directions. So some of them are saying, well, because this had something to do with tax issues, dapat perpetual disqualification. Iba na naman sinasabi na, well, hindi, ang issue dito is moral turpitude, so dapat automatically hindi. Yung iba sinasabi na hindi ito moral turpitude, but hindi siya nag-serve or nagbayad ng fine niya, so therefore dapat ma-disqualify siya or something like that. So I'm seeing at least 3 angles of attack dun sa disqualification cases. So parang, kumbaga yung if Duterte dati was doing this kind of multi-angle attack kay Trillanes, so now the opposition is kind of doing that to the Marcoses, and who knows, it might stick. At least it's getting more momentum in terms of discussions. So let's see, at don't believe me, basahin niyo yung mga analysis ni Justice Carpio and mga others. I mean, you can say whatever you want, in terms of your political preferences or his political preference, but I mean, Justice Carpio is a solid lawyer. I mean, so basahin niyo yung mga, at least yung mga kinu-quote niya or sinesite niya yung mga key provisions sa ating saligang batas, sa election laws, etc. So basahin yan. I really suggest. So maybe next time we can have a more detailed analysis on that. I'm not an election law expert. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to pretend. But as a social science person, right, and as a journalist for that matter, I think we have to provide an overview. And then yun nga, we're gonna post soon yung interview namin with Attorney Star Lamparo kung saan pinag-usapan namin yung nitty-gritty na yan. But of course, this issue has been evolving, so more and more details are coming in. So pag-usapan natin yun. Pero yun nga, three versions na nakita ko at least so far, no? Yung hindi moral turpitude yung case, but the fine was not paid, therefore may problema pa rin, or this is a moral turpitude case, or regardless, when it has to do something with tax evasion, then I'm not saying that. Well, it has to do something with the tax issue, then therefore may perpetual disqualification. Yun yung mga petitions na nakita natin na binabato, no? Laban sa Marcos campaign. And of course, let's see how good these Marcos lawyers are going to be in terms of dealing with this issue, no? Uy, grabe ka naman, Siegfried. Hindi yan Ilocano or something like that. I think Justice Carpio has an Ilocano side din, mga Carpio. Di ba sila Ma'am Carpio Morales na Ilocano din? I think Batak siya eh. And Justice, I think they're all relatives in one way or another. Anyways, marami naman Ilocano dyan. Anyways, this is not about that. Okay. All right. Now, let's say just for the sake of scenario, that the race will indeed dramatically change, and the disqualifying cases, one of them at least will hit, no? And in that scenario, ang mangyayari is that potentially ang mangyayari dito is it's going to be LENI versus Isko, which is going to be a very, very interesting showdown. And I'm not saying it in a like I'm excited per se, but I'm just saying that that's something that I think not many people foresaw, that possibility, no? But that could become the other scenario whereby this goes down between Isko and LENI. So I think in that sense, of course, alam natin yung maging positioning ni Isko. I mean, especially if Isko gets the endorsement of President Duterte, and not just endorsement, a little bit more than endorsement, no? From President Duterte, meaning machinery and support and all, then Isko could be in very strong position, no? Pinag-usapan na natin yan in the previous, sir. And of course, yung strength ni Isko, or what he would emphasize as his strength, is yung issue ng kanyang executive credentials, no? What he has achieved over the past 2-3 years. So I think here, ang dapat approach siguro nila LENI camp is to emphasize not only her role as a vice president, but also her local government role, or for that matter, ano yung ginawa nila sa Naga. So the Naga model has to come out more strongly. Yun ang hindi ko masyado nakikita pa eh. It's more about what she has done as a vice president, which is completely understandable because, of course, vice president is the second highest office, and LENI Robredo has been. This is her. This is the position that she occupies. But I think where I think LENI has to make more points and more emphasis is yung the Robredo model in Naga. Now it's progressive. It's not just, it's beyond liberal. It's really progressive, right? Grassroots driven. Nakikita na natin yun sa elements of messaging at saka yung charisma at appeal ni LENI. But I think that has to be more emphasized because if this goes down between Isko and LENI, I think maging issue talaga dyan, hindi lang yung values issue. Because in fairness naman to Isko, he has made it clear na, ayaw na ng EJK. He has said certain things. Of course, we understand the circumstances and all on ICC, etc. But in fairness naman kay Isko, on China, tough din yung statements niya. So it's not like, Duterte or even BBM positioning dun sa foreign policy and all. So I think for a lot of people, if this becomes between Isko and LENI, ang maging usapan dyan is yung managerial skills. No, I think that's where it can get very interesting. So of course, the Isko camp will emphasize the fact that, Isko, despite his very humble background, he inangat niya yung sarili niya. Nag-aral siya, nag-improve siya ng sarili niya, pumunta siya sa nag-executive courses siya in Harvard, in Oxford, etc. So I think that's where LENI has to come in also and says, well, graduate siya ng UP School of Economics, may background siya sa economics, hindi lang siya lawyer, and at the same time, yung ROBREDO model in Naga, and how the Robredos have been part of the success of the Naga model. So yun yung magiging interesting na exchange if ever this becomes an Isko versus LENI showdown. And who knows? I mean, that could be more than a possibility. It could be a probability. So I think unahin ko na ngayon pa lang yan, analyze na natin yung issue na yan, no? Para hindi tayo biglang magano kasi yun nga, daming twisted plot, hindi lang plot twist dito. So I'm not discounting the possibility that it could go down between LENI and so I think attacking for the LENI people, attacking Isko as, alam mo na, you know what I'm saying. I don't think that line will work as much because people saw naman when Isko was mayor of Manila, wala naman widespread EJ case. In fairness naman kay Isko, strong yung statements niya on China. He made it clear na, well, makajos siya, he's a family man, etc. And in fairness naman kay Isko, hindi naman siya bara-bara in terms of his public policy approach. It's systematic, it's evidence-based, etc. Or at least, yun yung messaging ng campaign nila. So I don't think maging as vulnerable si Isko to that kind of attack as opposed to, let's say, if Bongo or Sara Duterte or even kay Bongo Marcos is the issue na. So, because kay Bongo Marcos, of course, yung issue is like, ano naman yung achievements mo nung nasa Ilocos, etc., right? So yon. So I think the LENI team has to prepare also for that possibility because the Isko team already has prepared yung dossier nila, in terms of how to defend themselves on multiple levels. And Isko has the cool factor. It has to improve and hindi pa nandyan. I think BBM still has the more cool factor. Again, I'm talking about messaging and advertising, campaigning and all. But Isko is getting there. And kita niyo si Isko, di ba? Yung Japors na bagets, tapos naka-sneakers na white. Nakita ba yung picture niya, yung friend ko na isang ambassador, nag-post siya ng pictures with si Isko. Lahat sila mga ambassador, si Isko lang, Apple Watch, tapos parang naka-jeans lang. Yung bata effect, di ba? Millennial, di ba? Millennial president ang dating ni Isko eh. So may cool factor. So I think, LENI has to also I think take that in consideration, and also I think the campaign has to work also on the cool factor aside from the care factor. Also work not only on the issue of values, mahalagang of course values, yung human rights, yung ating yung sovereign rights, yung international law, rule of law, of course mahalaga yan. The same time, of course, dapat may emphasis din sa managerial skills, yung economics background ni LENI Robredo. I think she has to really show that. If I'm not mistaken, well, this is based on my interview with former President Arroyo. Back in 2019, pwede ni check yan online. I interviewed her, among other, of course, senior officials, among others. I think this is a few months after I interviewed Prime Minister Mahathir of Malaysia and Secretary Lorenzana and Justice Carpio. But one of my interviews was with Madam Arroyo, and Ma'am Arroyo told me that actually her father, Diosdado Macapagal, had an advanced degree. I'm not sure if PhD, but advanced degree in economics. And if I'm not mistaken, lawyer siya, diba? Si Macapagal, Diosdado, no? So he was a lawyer economist. So interestingly, if again, I have to double check that, no? If LENI becomes the next president, she will be the first economist lawyer president in more than half a century, and the first economist lawyer president in more than half a century na walang authoritarian populist touch. Tignan mo Duterte and Marcos, right? Both those presidents, lawyer president, but look at their approach, very interestingly, but LENI is the one na I think more similar kay Diosdado Macapagal, right? Yeah, yun ang pag-usapan. Sorry, replyin ko lang to kasi may nagsabi na kailangan ko i-reply lang to. Kung may dumating na yung delivery ko. Okay, eto. May question ba kayo dyan? Anong question niyo dyan? Di ba? Hindi ako biased, I'm fair. I covered all. Yan, kita niyo ng mga box. Yan. Balik tayo. Makikita na. Ano na? Wala eh. Pagod talaga. Kagabi, I wanted to work talaga. Wala eh. Pagod. Oh, ano? Kamusta kayo dyan? May mga tanong kayo dyan. Kamusta? Kamusta si Randy? Pwede magpunta si Lenny sa Davao but not Kiko? Just to be sure. Taga Davao ka ba, Randy? Uy, mabait ang mga taga Davao from what I saw myself years ago. Napakabait yung mga taga Davao. Ay, ibang usapan yung Duterte and all of that and politics, but the people of Davao are lovely people. Sobrang enjoy ako nung time ko sa Davao, and I really look forward to get back there as soon as possible, God willing. Catalina, James. Kamusta, James? Thank you for dropping by. Kamusta, Amado from Zamboanga City? Kamusta kayo dyan, Amado? Kamustang Zamboanga? The other pearl of Mindanao aside from Davao, no? I mean, maraming magandang city sa Davao eh. I'm sorry, sa Mindanao, the other beautiful city in Mindanao, another pearl of Mindanao aside from Davao, no? So meron Jensan, meron Davao, meron Zamboanga. Ganda rin ng Bukit noon eh. Tsaka of course Marawi, God willing na yung reconstruction na ayusin na talaga eh. Andun ako nung 2019, very depressing situation in terms of reconstruction. Dapat ayusin talaga yan. Napakaganda pa naman yung syudad na yan. Tsaka napakabait yung mga tao. Edwin, kamusta dyan? From Canada. Kamusta pa tayo dyan? Thank you for dropping by. May tanong kay John, do you think China is meddling? Well, we have an open political system, unfortunately. I don't think we have the necessary infrastructure and to ensure na protektado yung ating election from international interference. I'm not pointing at any specific country. I'm just saying, vulnerable tayo. I mean, nakita natin, pati American, European elections ka, nagkaroon ng interference yan. Pilipinas pa. So I think we have to do something about that. But, so long as the Filipino people are aware, are conscious, are mobilized, are patriotic, kahit sino maging politiko, kahit sino maging politician na next, kahit sino maging presidente, we can make sure na, they'll uphold the interests of the country while at the same time having reasonable relations with China. We have to cooperate naman with China on certain issues and all. At hindi naman pwede away-away lang on everything. We have to have a compartmentalized, issue-specific, and long-term oriented approach to the issue of China. Hindi pwede emotional lang, hindi lang pwede naive lang, no? Not panic, not at the same time naive, no? Yung mga extremes na yan ay dapat ayusin natin. Mature dapat na approach natin. I have a column coming on Monday on South China Morning Post on Singapore's foreign policy. Makikita niyo dyan. So there's a lot of quotation of Lee Kuan Yew and other top leaders, and I think there's a thing or two we can learn from Singapore, although of course there are differences we have with Singapore pagdating sa ating strategic orientation and vulnerabilities, right? Any other questions? Ano mga pinapost niyo dyan na Santiago, Annabel, ano ba yan? Uy, huwag kayong mag-spam dito ha. Huwag kayong mag-spam dito. Spam ba? Sorry, I'm just saying, just in case. Kasi minsan may mga spam na parang, parang link to kung ano-anong company or whatever. Naku naman. Thanks sa mga nagbigay ng stars. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Meron tayong pang Starbucks coffee, except hindi ako nag-star. Saka Ilocano tayo, so hindi naman 3-in-1, yung yung mga 30 pesos na pwede kong gawin sa bayan na yun. Di tayo mag-Starbucks effect. Oy, kanina ka pa dyan, ha? Chilambo ba yung pangalan mo? Kanina ka ba nag-post ng post sa spam na yan, ha? Nako, balikan ko yan. Check ko yan. Bawal ang spammers dito. Wassalamualaikum, Dene. Kamusta po kayo dyan from Zamboanga City? Opo, salamat po. Thank you very much po for dropping by. God bless po. Ano po yung yung Korean name? Sorry, hindi ko mabasa. Alam ko yung Korean yan, but hindi ko mabasa. Anong tanong niya? Ano yung 1600 Lenny? Ano yan? Sorry, I mean, I'm not gonna pretend I know exactly all the details. Kaya kanina humabol ako dun sa analysis ng mga mga commercials nila eh. Just to play safe, no? Hindi yan new glasses, matagal na yan. Ngayon lang ako nag-glasses. At napansin ko, maganda mag-glasses kasi medyo hindi nyo makita, grabe masyado yung eye bags, super obvious naman. Nakikita nyo naman. What issue they will use against Isko? I mean, you can imagine what attack will be na yung usual attack against centrist politicians. Yeah, I mean, medyo similar dun sa attacks kay Grace po, I would say, before. Yeah. But the ISCO team, they're prepared. They have been prepared for all of these things. So, I think the LENI team has to also prepare for the possibility that this could be between ISCO and LENI, right? And I think the ISCO team should also prepare for that possibility just in case, yung mga cases ay umusad in a certain direction, no? Opo, Amado. God willing po, bisita tayo dyan sa Mindanao again. Davao, Zamboanga, Bukidnon, God willing, Marawi, Jensen. Tagal ko rin bumalik sa Jensen. Pero na-chambahan ko nung pumunta ako nun. Dati pa, fresh pa ako nun eh. Bagets pa ako nun. Cute pa ako nun eh. Na ano, yung parang tuna festival ba yan, yung sa Jensen. Yun na naabutan ko. Naku, ang sarap ng tuna dun sa Jensen. Ibang level. Oh. Tapos nakita ko pa yung mga Pacman supermarket. Anong tawag dun? Yung mga Pacman supermarket dun sa Jensen. But this is long time ago, so I don't know what's ano dyan ngayon. Ano yung block agad? Wala naman tayong binablock eh. Sabi ko lang yung yung nagsispam na paulit-ulit na link na pinopost. Eh, spam na yan eh. Oh. Oy, John, wag tayo napansin nyo, I don't attack any other bloggers, etc. Minsan may konting spice tayo na ilalagay, konting serve the tea. But hindi tayo ganun eh. We are issue-based. Issue-based po yung analysis natin dito. Hindi tayo mga banat style. Oo, kadiri naman yung mga discussion na parang puro na lang atake, ganun, personalan. Di ba? Yung medyo level up tayo dyan. Yeah. Anyways, honestly, I'm learning from our discussions here in exchanges. Just to be honest, no? I mean, hindi ako hindi ako nagpipretend na alam ko lahat ng issue. Actually, dahil dito sa Meta Live, lalo ako na napipilitan na to check more and more yung mga latest developments sa elections, etc. Oh, yan na naman, nagpo-post na naman spam, Diums Chilumbo. Oh, yan, wala. Babalikan ko yan. Block yan pag spamming yan, ha? Ano mangyayari pag na-disqualify? Yun nga Christian, yung pinag-usapan na kung ma-disqualify si Marcos at nag-search si Isko as the administration bet, baka ang mangyayari is labanan na ito ni Isko and Leni. And then, of course, sabi ko nga, hindi pwede na maging... I don't think that the debate will just be defined by values debate because in fairness naman kay Isko, he's much more progressive than President Duterte on a number of key issues. And also more pragmatic and sound on some of our foreign policy positions, etc. So I think maging issue din dyan yung managerial skills, no? Yeah, so tsaka yung macroeconomic planning, etc. Nako, spam talaga yung isa. Paligan ko kanina pa, naka 15 same message na nilagay mo. Nako, kung meron tayong card dito, ito na, lagay na natin dyan. Yon, what can you say? The volunteerism. Yeah, Chris Nazareth. Yun nga yung sinabi ko eh. Increasingly, this is looking like a LENI movement, no? This doesn't look like just a electoral campaign. And my sense is given na sobrang high stakes yung elections na ito at sobrang the odds are really grabe yung odds, no? Talagang tough fight yan for the LENI campaign kung talagang they want to emerge victorious. So I think really making this a movement is their best and perhaps the only way that they could have really best shot at changing the direction of the country next year. Yun lang. Grabe ka! Ano yun sinasabi mo dyan? Nick daw. Moderator? Anong famous? Grabe naman kayo, di nga tayo famous eh. Ano lang tayo? Di pa nga ako vlogger eh. Kamusta kayo dyan, Renz from Misamis Occidental? Salamat po, thank you very much. Kamusta Amy from QC? Yan, mga Quezon City! Yan, maganda yan. Sino pa ba? Wala na kayong tanong? Wow tulog pa yata kayo eh. Ano naman tanong nyo dyan? Di ba, Ezekiel, kanina ko pa sinasabi, di ba? Yun nga I think pagdating sa... Okay, if you look at Leni's campaign, malakas yung emphasis dun sa caring, sincere leadership. What I think they can improve upon, looking at the messaging of BBM and other top candidates, is yung cool factor. Because you have to not only, message to people, isignal sa tao na sincere kang leader, but you also have to inspire them to be able to believe in a better tomorrow. No? Hindi lang yung sasabihin mo na you care for them and all, which is very important, of course. But of course, you also dapat may cool factor para may confidence ang tao sa'yo at ma-inspire sila to imagine a better future. So I think yun yung factor na medyo kailangan pa i-emphasize further. Josephina, yeah, Sydney many times. Sorry, I used to be in Australia a lot. Yeah. My ex was Australian. Anyways, yeah. So I stayed there. Anyways, okay, let's not go there. San Juan City. Yan, kamusta dyan? City niya yan, di ba? Mga ehersito. Mga ERAP. Yan. Ang gandang San Juan. Magandang San Juan. Hindi ko sabihin saan ako, pero malapit ako doon. Magandang San Juan. Mas lively ang caravan ni VP Lenny. Oo, yung ano lang yung pink color pa lang So, but, don't underestimate other campaigns. I'm just saying. Dun sa caravan ni Lenny, parang ginagaya na. No? Yung parang nag-trendsetter na So, tignan natin dyan. Oo nga, yung delivery ko. Thanks, Jess, for reminding me. Saan yung delivery? Ayan, text natin. Baka mawala yung... Mahirap na. Hindi. Hindi. Wala yatang bayad Wait lang. Kasi di ba kung kailangan mo magbayad, hintayin ka talaga. Pero kung yung deliver lang, baka kung hindi ka magpakita, wala na. Naku po. Kasi mura yung delivery na pinili ko. Sana naglalamove na lang para mabilis. Ay, di pala pwede mag-endorse. Never mind. Meta ko lang naman yan Basta! Ilocano kasi ako pinili ko yung pinakamura siguro na delivery. Tuloy. 3 araw na, wala pa. Para everyday morning mag-message siya, andito na sa warehouse, mamaya itetext ka ng driver, ganyan. Tagal na, 3 araw na. Ano ba yan? Mag-4 na araw na, sana nandyan na. Ano nangyari sa PDP laban? Ewan ko dyan sa PDP laban na yan. Naku po. So much for a ruling party. Wala silang... Si tatay, wala na siyang direct candidate talaga Wala, yung vote anointed successor yan. Kasi naman, papaganang-ganang na siya, tuloy. Diba? Kung sana, very disciplined all si Tatay Digong at saka strategic talaga siya, di sana ngayon si Sarah yung bet niya. Or at least, Hi. Kamusta rin sa mga kaibigan natin from Emirat? From Abu Dhabi. Another beautiful city. Yup. Yung mga friends natin sa Abu Dhabi, may column ako dyan next week with The National. Diba? Yun yung top newspaper in dyan. Meron akong column next week. Medyo focused dito sa Marcos, but also Isko and Leni issue. Medyo may pagka-Isko and Leni focused din yung article, yung column ko dyan sa The National. So, abangan yan. Yes. I think, Prof, hindi gagawin ni VP Leni yung ginagawa ni BBM na puro, Ano yung JP? Wait lang. Mahaba yung sinabi mo balikan ko. Basa. Sige. Yeah, okay. I see your point. Yun lang, kasi this race is evolving At in fairness, tignan mo kay BBM, nag-tweak din siya ng messaging niya, So, yung ibang messaging niya is really hope, lightness, coolness, steady hand, tiwala kayo sa akin. So, it's not this kamay na bakal and all of those stuff na you usually associate with the former President Marcos or the kind of messaging that Duterte had back in 2016 and all. So, that's interesting. Sirky, kanina ko pa pinag-usapan yan si Lenny. Late kayo dumating. Alam mo, ito yung parang classroom na nag-lecture ka na. Tapos bigla may darating na estudyante. Sir, di pa natin pinag-usapan. Ayan tayo Di kaya kasi, late kasi kayo sa class Pwede nabutan ng natin, lecture natin. Tuloy. Yon. Mamaya, check nyo please yung yung pag na-post ko na yung recorded version. Doon nyo basahin. Doon yung tignan. So, I discussed 3 issues. Recap tayo, class. Una-una, pinag-usapan natin is this. So, recap tayo. So, the first thing we talked about is this. Wait lang. Whew. Okay. 3 bagay po ang pinag-usapan natin, wait lang na-conscious ako bigla dito sa summary. 3 bagay po ang pinag-usapan natin. Yung una is that Leni's electoral campaign is increasingly turning into a movement. At sa aking palagay, that is the best and perhaps only way for the Leni team to have a shot at making sure na mag-iba yung direction ng bansa next year. So, yun ang first thing na pinag-usapan natin. So, you see that in terms of solidness, of support across the country, the passionate network of grassroots support, at saka the emotional resonance that Leni's campaign has among all classes in the Philippines. I'm not saying everyone, but I'm saying among supporters cutting across socioeconomic classes. So yun ang unang pinag-usapan natin. The second factor na pinag-usapan natin is the possibility that the race could be radically different a month or two from now, depending dito sa disqualification cases laban kay Marcos, because now we're seeing that the disqualification cases are medyo parang Hydra affected. They're taking many different angles, no? So hindi lang issue na whether moral turpitude ito. Ngayon, meron pa yung mga nagsasabi na whether even if it's not a moral turpitude case, hindi siya nagbayad ng fine niya, therefore dapat may disqualification. There are others saying na well, it has to do something with the the tax code, etc. So dapat may perpetual disqualification. So nag-evolve itong legal angle dito sa election na yan. So we cannot fully discount the possibility, I'm not saying probability, that the race could look very different, which brought me to my third discussion, and that is that one scenario that is not as much talked about is a possibility that who knows, once this goes down to the wire, baka LENI versus Isko yan, di ba? And in that sense, no, the strategy of the LENI team, I think it would be insufficient kung ang maging debate lang is values debate. Because in fairness kay Isko, he has a much more progressive stance than, if ever maging administration bet talaga siya, than President Duterte on issue of EJK, on issue of, Philippine foreign policy, West Philippine Sea, among others, no? So I think that is where the LENI campaign has to also emphasize yung kanilang managerial background, the Jessie Robredo Naga model, her economics background, because the Isko team, of course, will also try to emphasize their success over the past few years, yung mga projects na ginawa nila sa Manila, the proactive leadership, of course, Isko's training around the world in terms of his executive courses in Harvard, Oxford, among others. So I think that is where LENI has to opt the game, and also does discuss about yung kanyang economics literacy, no, at saka yung kanyang understanding of proper macro management of the country so that we can get out of the crisis we are in. All right? Okay. So I'll just keep it there. So we covered three important issues pagdating dito sa elections when it comes from the perspective of the LENI campaign. So in previous Meta Lives, pinag-usapan natin from the Isko campaign's perspective, from the BBM campaign's perspective. Hopefully we can talk about more candidates, Calyodi especially, but also Pacquiao, Lacson and mga others. Sila Lacson, parati ko nakikita sa YouTube eh. Hindi ko alam yung algorithm ko sa YouTube, dati pati sa internet, parati ko nakikita si mga commercial ni Lacson. Interesting, magaling din, mahusay din yung mga commercials niya. In fairness. Yung iba nga, I didn't even know they're a political campaign. Biglang sa dulan, dun si Lacson is like, Education Plus, yung mga ganun. Alright, maraming salamat. Thank you very much dun sa mga nanood. I hope, we contributed kahit papano lang, kahit konti lang dito sa enrichment of yung ating discussion ukol sa ating politika, no? Kind of a much more evidence-based, much more analytic approach, hindi yung Marites approach, hindi yung Banat approach, hindi yung, alam mo na, yung mga that kind of stuff na sensationalist, gets a lot of attention and all, but hindi tayo magpaganon, di ba? Levels tayo, di ba? And okay naman, di ba? Naka-glasses, di ba? Para hindi makita yung eyebags ko. Para di tayo dyan. Kasi lalaitin na naman ako mamaya eh. Alam ko yan eh. Not that I care, kasi alam ko naman eh. Alam ko naman. But still. And I actually use eyeglasses. Yeah, I mean, I do. For my work and writing and all. I mean, there were times I was reading 4 or 5 books a month. Just to put things in context. Hindi pa kasama dyan yung mga articles and essays, etc. or journal articles. So you really have to take care of yourself. Make sure may glasses ka when you need it, etc. At dati kasi mahilig ako mag-games eh. Ang mahal kasi ng PS5. Mahal pa rin. At, kulang yata yung chips eh. Siguro yung future gawin natin Meta Live games. FIFA. Mga FIFA 2022. Sige. Ganun na lang. Manood kayo ha. Magaling ako. Hindi nga lang alam yung mga talents ko dyan. Alam na this. Kamusta dyan, Elvis? From Florida. Alam mo yung lolo ko, yung late lolo ko, si Rodrigo. Florida based siya before. God bless his soul. Hindi si Miami. Pero basta. Malapit doon. Ano yung bus? Wait lang. May naalala ko bigla eh. Biglang nag-cross. Mamaya na yan. Late ka, Bowie. Panoorin mo yung pag ipopost ko to. Panoorin yung from the very beginning. Ano ba yan? Nagbigay na tayo, nag-summarize pa tayo. Ayan na, manood na kayo dyan. Ipopost ko na kayo na. May last questions pa kayo dyan? Ayan, maraming salamat ha. Maraming salamat. I know, weekend yan. Magpahinga na kayo. Habol pa ako sa trabaho. Thank you so much. And salamat din kay Dian from Singapore, from friends, from Zamboanga, from Mindanao, from Davao, from Quezon City, San Juan, across the country, Canada, United Arab Emirates, friends around the world. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much again on a weekend joining us. So yan, pahinga na kayo and God bless. Have a blessed Sunday tomorrow, no? Sabbath day. Alright. Pansin nyo, hindi ako nagpo-post or anything like that on Sunday at all as much as possible unless it has to do with something spiritual and all. Right? Alright. Salamat. Thank you very much. God bless.